Hey everyone, welcome to episode 60. This is the final episode in my series on the kingdom Plantae. I've talked about all of the major lineages of plants, so today I'm going to tie all of this together into the human story. I'm going to explore the many ways in which humans have interacted with plants, and plants have interacted with humans. This episode will be a merger, if you will, of the ecological function and utility of plants and the practical uses that we humans find for them. For example, trees have several ecological functions. They can provide shelter and shade and physical habitat, they stabilize the soil, and many trees can grow fruit that animals eat off of or that they use to lay their eggs within. From a human angle, we use the wood of the tree for building stuff, and we eat the fruit as part of our diet. Now, this is obviously a very simple example, but it demonstrates the basic kind of stuff that I'll be talking about today. Except, I'll be applying the principle to all kinds of plants. I'll look at edible plants, like those from the earliest hominid diet, to the GMO crops used in modern industrial agriculture. I'll look at plants used in textiles, or as tools, or as decoration. I'll look at plants that have structural value for construction and furniture, and I'll look at plants that have medicinal and therapeutic properties, as well as plant-derived drugs. As you probably know, plants have played a foundational role in all of our lives, in all of human civilization. Our lives depend on plants in a million different ways. It's really an understatement to say that they're important. The most fundamental and basic role that plants have in the lives of humans is being food. For millions of years, stretching backwards for geologic and evolutionary lengths of time, the ancestors of the human species, as well as our cousin species, and the animal species that we preyed upon for meat, all depended on the plants for food. Even carnivorous predators depend on plants, for without the plants, the herbivores would starve to death, and without the teeming herds of herbivores to prey upon, the predators would find themselves short of food and facing starvation as well. There's a reason plants are referred to ecologically as primary producers. By harnessing the light energy of the sun to power the metabolism of carbon dioxide, plants can create biomass with nothing but water, air, and sunlight. This biomass then gets eaten by insects, or grazing ungulates, or tree-dwelling primates, and it gets digested, and some of the chemicals and some of the chemical energy gets incorporated into the herbivore's body. The carnivores then come along and eat these herbivorous animals. They eat the insects, they eat the grazing ungulates or the tree-dwelling primates, and again, they incorporate some of that chemical energy and some of the nutrients into their own bodies. This is the exact case for humans. When you eat anything, be it a plant or an animal, your body will try to digest it. If it's digestible, the food will get broken down on a chemical level, and the derived nutrients will flow through your blood to all of your tissues, where the cells absorb the nutrients and keep themselves alive, and this, in turn, keeps you alive. Plants are integral to the human diet because they provide us with a wide variety of nutrients and vitamins, as well as fiber, although fiber isn't actually digested. Instead, fiber kind of acts as a digestive aid, or a sponge that helps lubricate the intestinal tract. In the early days of the Homo sapien, the plants that we ate were wild-growing, like the fruits one can find naturally hanging off of a tree, or some kind of bush plant covered in berries. Other natural vegetable foods include legumes like beans, lentils, and peas, as well as roots, tree nuts, seeds, and leafy greens like cruciferous vegetables. I like cruciferous plants almost as much as I like the word cruciferous. It's pretty fun to say. This group includes plants like cabbage, rutabaga, cauliflower, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. The cruciferous plants are widely associated with good health. Where a group of people have a diet that's high in cruciferous vegetables, they tend to have better quality of health than those people whose diet doesn't have as much. The cruciferous vegetables contain a chemical called glucoraphanin, which is metabolized by gut bacteria to sulforaphane, which then stimulates the production of what are called phase 2 enzymes, like glutathione S-transferases and quinone reductases. These are enzymes that are associated with the suppression of carcinogens. Basically, they offer a little bit of biochemical help in reducing your risk of developing cancer from carcinogens like aflatoxin and phenanthrene. When agriculture was developed more than 5,000 years ago, humans began to eat a lot of grain foods. The cereal grain crops were planted and harvested and used to produce everything from breads to dumplings. Mini grains like wheat, rye, barley, and oat are harvested and then ground into a dust called flour. The flour is mixed with water, or milk, or eggs, or some other ingredient, and baked, where it rises to create breads. Bread can be eaten by itself, or used as the base for a number of other ingredients, like how toasts get covered in jams and marmalades, or how warm baked bread gets sprinkled with spices and seasonings, or how bread is stacked with meat and cheese and lettuce to make a sandwich or a burger. I should mention that breads also require yeasts, which are a kind of fungus. But when I go over the kingdom fungi, I'll have an episode on humans and fungi and how humans have interacted with fungus and vice versa throughout our history. And during that episode, I'll talk a little bit about yeasts and the role they've played in our food and our culinary sciences. Anyway, grains are also used to create pastas, which are a hugely important staple food in many parts of the world. Italy is perhaps the most famous place that just loves their pasta. Think of almost any type of pasta, and it almost certainly has an Italian name. Spaghetti, rotini, macaroni, linguine, vermicelli, fettuccine. You get the idea. Now, rice is another kind of grain, and it's a hugely common food in much of the world, particularly in East Asia. Long ago, Asian farmers discovered the utility of tiered farms. The local geography in East Asia is often rugged and irregular, covered in steep, sloping hills and ravines. To farm this land, the inhabitants carved the soil into stepped terraces, with each level of the terrace, each step, able to hold a certain amount of water. Rice plants are grown on these terraces, with the rice entirely submerged in the water. Rice doesn't necessarily need to be grown in water, but the fact that it can grow in water is useful, because when rice is grown in water, all of the weeds and parasitic plants that normally feed off of rice or attack rice can't grow here. They can't grow in these submerged, super hydrated conditions. The weeds need air, and so the submerged rice is out of bounds. This submerged terrace technique is a really effective way for growing rice in Asia, and for getting very big yields out of their rice crops. Big crop yields are important when rice is a staple food for literally billions of people. Rice is eaten by itself, or it's mixed into a larger, more complex dish where it's typically used as a carbohydrate base. There's a particularly famous Chinese dish called Lohan Jai, or Buddha's Delight, which is a vegetarian medley of rice and bamboo shoots with seasoning like soy sauce, garlic, peanut oil, or a Chinese cooking wine called huangzhu, and it's mixed with a number of other plant-based ingredients. The Buddha's Delight recipe typically includes sliced carrots, snow peas, black mushrooms, noodles, Napa cabbage, and something crunchy like peanuts, ginkgo nuts, lotus seeds, or water chestnuts. Other lesser-used ingredients include bean sprouts, bok choy, celery, red jujubes, potatoes, corn, and certain edible funguses like straw mushrooms or oyster mushrooms. Even though it's primarily a vegetarian dish, sometimes animal products are added, like shrimp, oyster, chicken, or eggs. In India, where the Hindu religion is most widely practiced, vegetarian diets are the norm. Religious beliefs and traditions, like the veneration of the sacred cow and the Jainist principle of nonviolence, have helped forge a massive society that feeds mostly off of plants instead of meat. Many of these foods have exotic names, and equally exotic tastes and aromas, like pakoda, which is a large vegetable like an onion or a chili pepper that's deep fried in a batter called ghee. The onion pakoda is called piyaz pakoda. When it's made with potatoes, it's called aloo pakoda. With spinach, it's palak pakoda. There's foods like chana masala, which is a dish made of cooked black chana chickpeas, tomatoes, onions, and chili peppers, all seasoned with garlic, ginger, and a mixture of Indian spices called garam masala. Vegetables are used for an almost uncountable number of dishes and meals all across the world. In Japan, seaweed is used to wrap up rice into sushi and to make miso soup. A dish popular from the Middle East to Eastern Europe is moussaka, which is a potato or eggplant covered in sauce or custard, typically eaten warm. The Greeks like their spanakopita, which is a thin pastry of phyllo covered in olive oil and filled with spinach, feta cheese, egg, and onion. In Ethiopia, they enjoy injera, which is a flatbread made out of baked teff flour. Russians have a number of famous vegetable dishes, like the sour-tasting beetroot soup called borscht, a cold cucumber radish onion soup called okroshka, and pierogi dumplings filled with stuff like potatoes and or sauerkraut, among various other ingredients. Now, I could go on forever, literally almost forever, about all of the vegetable foods that we eat all over the world, but for your sake and for mine, I'll stop here. The point I'm trying to make is that humans fundamentally depend on plants for food, and that we don't just eat a huge variety of vegetables, we cook these vegetables and mix them together in a variety of different ways to make an almost limitless combination of meals. Besides food, however, plants still have tremendous utility. For example, we use plant fibers to make textiles, and we use woody plant tissues to make furniture and building materials. Some of the earliest textiles that the human species have ever created were simple twisted or braided strands of yarn or rope. Species of grasses and rushes often have long, thin leaves that can be easily tied or wrapped or interlaced together to create a textile. The grass-based plant fibers are typically used in the production of rope. Clothing is typically made with a more flexible, softer kind of textile, like the linen that we create from the flax plant. Cotton plants have their cotton harvested, decorticated, and spun into cotton yarn, which then gets turned into textiles like shirts and socks and other clothing. Because of the reliable quality of cotton, it's become one of the most popular materials for making cheap, reasonably durable, comfortable clothing. Textiles can also be made from a particularly impressive plant called hemp, which is a variety of cannabis sativa that grows extremely fast and produces high-quality plant fibers that can be used to create equally high-quality products. First, the hemp plant is laid on the ground, where it gets run over by crushing rollers that pulverize the unnecessary plant material, and brush rollers come and sweep away the waste, and this leaves just the strong hemp fibers behind. These fibers are then pulverized to make paper, or they're braided together to make thick rope or tiny strings. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, sailboats would use thick, sturdy ropes made from hemp, covered in a protective tar to keep them from rotting. The hemp fibers can also be made into thin fabrics with the texture of linen, or thick, coarse fabrics like the kind used in a giant farming sack. Hemp has a utility that reaches out beyond simple textiles. It has immediate ecological utility in that it's used to fight off weeds. Hemp can grow very tall and very dense, and this means that it will crowd up and block out light from reaching the ground. This is often efficient enough to starve out shorter species of weeds that might be interfering with an agricultural crop or something like that. Additionally, hemp roots are able to filter the water in the soil and remove dangerous compounds, making the water cleaner and healthier for any other plants that happen to be living downstream. Hemp is also a major fiber used in the production of composite materials and plastics, which can be used in car doors and sinks, among many, many other things. Hemp can be used as a biofuel. The oils produced by the hemp plant can literally be extracted and used to directly fuel a diesel engine, although the commercial scale of hemp used for biofuel is relatively small, so any hemp biofuel that you might be able to buy would be relatively expensive. Hemp can be used as a building material when it's pounded into flat sheets of hemp fiberboard, or it can be shaped into blocks and stacked like bricks as thermal insulation, or for soundproofing a wall. Hemp fibers can even be integrated into concrete mixes to provide a degree of elastic strength within the concrete block. Where hemp fibers can be mixed with other ingredients to create composite building materials, other plants and plant tissue can be used directly to create building materials. As you probably guessed, I'm talking about cutting down trees and harvesting wood and carving the wood or cutting up the wood and using the wood to build stuff. Lignin is the chemical in the plant's cell walls that gives it the strength and the structural integrity that we associate with wood. It gives the wood the qualities that we need from it. This lignin is a long polymer, and it gets arranged in sheets with uncountable trillions of other lignin molecules, and their collective interweaving and interconnecting on the cellular level gives the wood its hardness and its strength. We've taken advantage of these qualities, and we've used wood for all manner of things for many tens of thousands of years. Our first sophisticated hunting tools were the spear and the bow and arrow, all items built from wood. When we captured fire and we used it to cook meat and keep ourselves warm through the cold, Paleolithic nights, we used wood as fuel. In later times, we began to use wood to build our homes and our furniture. In much of Europe, oak was the predominant wood used for building houses, thanks to its raw strength and its durability. Heavy oak doors made formidable gates for a castle that invading attackers would find particularly difficult to break down. Humans are so ingenious that we've even learned how to take low-quality wood that couldn't be used on its own for building anything, and we can break it down into wood chips that get amalgamated with glue into composite wood materials like fiberboard and particle board. These engineered wood panels are used for siding, for flooring, and for most things that regular wood is used for. The early boats and the ships that we used to navigate the oceans and colonize distant lands were all made of wood. Elm trees were particularly useful for this purpose, as elm wood could resist weakening from rot if it was kept hydrated, which it would be in the case for the wood used on a sail-powered ship. These sail-powered ships had to hold their sails on masts, and the mast itself had to be a tall, strong piece of wood that stood straight up. British sailors during the Age of Empire were known to plant various species of tree, like softwood pine trees, at the places that they visited and conquered, so that they would grow into the trees that could be later harvested to make masts for more ships in the British Navy. It was a long-term kind of plan, as a lot of these trees took decades, if not a century, to mature. Another really important utility that humans get out of plants is the extraction of medicines and healing compounds that are produced within the plant's tissues. Sometimes the plant has a chemical that it uses as a defense against mammal predators, or to discourage insects from eating it, or whatever else. And over time, we've discovered that applying these chemicals, for example, to a wound, can help along the healing process. Or ingesting the chemical can help treat a disease, or provide some other medicinal value. The first attempts at using plants for this kind of purpose involved gathering up nettles and dandelion and grinding them up, with their oils used as a topical agent to treat wounds or as ingredients in healing mixtures. For example, early folk medicine used the nettle's sting to induce inflammation, which was used to treat joint pain. The leaves were boiled to make a tea which was believed to be effective at treating problems with the kidneys, with the intestines, the heart and veins, and even the skin. Dandelions are also boiled into tea or ground down so that the oil can be collected, and this is also used to treat intestinal, liver, and urinary problems. There's an ancient Egyptian document, more than 3,500 years old, called the Ebers Papyrus, which catalogs natural plant medicines known at the time to the ancient Egyptians. The healing herbs listed on the Ebers Papyrus that were used by the ancient Egyptians included aloe, juniper, and castor beans. We still use the chemicals from the aloe plant today, usually as a kind of moisturizer or a lotion. Juniper has been used for a wide variety of things, like treating diabetes, or making tea that's good for your teeth, or even as a form of birth control. Castor beans can be pulverized to give castor oil, which has anti-inflammatory properties and might be protective for the liver. There are literally hundreds of other plants that offer biochemicals with medicinal value. For example, a flowering plant called St. John's wort is a well-known COX-1 inhibitor and an arachidonate 5-lipoxygenase inhibitor, which for some people makes it a useful treatment, or more appropriately a supplementary treatment, for light to moderate depression. There's a genus of neophyte plants called Ephedra, which produces alkaloid chemicals called ephedrins. These chemicals have a few interesting uses, like making breathing easier by dilating the bronchial tubes, or by increasing metabolism through some kind of thermogenic mechanism. Although it hasn't been proven to be a performance-enhancing drug, ephedra is often used as such, presumably because it increases the heart rate and constricts blood vessels, so to the athlete, it might feel like it's doing something. Hardcore athletes can get a little carried away when it comes to finding an edge over their competition, and they'll take anything they can that they think might give them even the slightest advantage. Some ephedra compounds were actually banned in the US because they caused serious, potentially fatal problems, with symptoms including headaches, insomnia and dizziness, itchiness, hypothermia and dehydration, and in really bad cases, irregular heartbeats, seizures, stroke, and heart attack. It's a rather morbid fact that throughout the great bulk of human history, our best way to discover a plant-based medicine was to simply eat the plant or apply its oils to our wounds. If it did nothing, then that was that. If it helps, then great, awesome, we learned something useful. But sometimes, oftentimes, because this is a trial by error, it led to greater problems like illness and death. And through the hard, long process of this triage, of this trial and error, of trying plants and seeing what helped us and what hurt us, we learned which plants offered safe and effective compounds, safe medicines, and which plants didn't provide anything. And we also learned which plants were more dangerous than they were helpful, plants that were poisonous, or that had an extremely painful sting that had no other beneficial uses. When technological sophistication really started to pick up pace in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, our capacity for manipulating and extracting chemicals from plants was massively increased. In the early 19th century, morphine was isolated from the opium poppy and used as a painkiller. Then, syrup of ipecac was isolated from ipecacuanha and used as a vomit-inducing agent to prevent poisoning. And then strychnine was isolated from the strychnine tree, and it was used as a dangerous and painful poison to kill rodent and bird pests, and in larger doses to kill other people. Many other chemicals were isolated during the early 19th century, like quinine, which was extracted from the cinchona tree and found use in treating malaria, and quinidine, which is a stereoisomer of quinine that's also extracted from the cinchona tree, except it's used to treat ventricular arrhythmias, or an irregular heartbeat. There's salicylic acid, which is a plant hormone that's used to treat skin conditions, like acne, warts, psoriasis, dermatitis, and dandruff. One of the plants with the most potent medicinal biochemicals is the opium poppy. The opium poppy plant grows a large seed pod, which is filled with a fluid substance called latex. This latex is absolutely packed with biochemicals that have all manner of uses in humans. You've probably heard of morphine and codeine, which are two phenanthrene alkaloids used primarily for pain management, either for chronic pain or for people coming out of surgeries or who've experienced physical trauma. There's another similar alkaloid called thebaine, which is used to produce a number of opiate drugs like hydrocodone and hydromorphone. And then there's morphine, which is used to produce heroin, which is an opioid drug occasionally used to treat pain, but it's primarily used recreationally as it delivers a long-lasting, stupefying state of intoxication, described as warm, relaxing ecstasy. Unfortunately, heroin is an extremely potent and addictive drug with major side effects, and recreational use, even medical use, can lead to heroin addiction. Heroin is one of the most dangerous drugs, too, because it's involved in a majority of drug overdose cases. There's currently a huge opium epidemic in the US, due largely in part to the overprescription of these opium-based drugs. Due to a corrupt kickback scheme with pharmaceutical companies, many doctors began overprescribing opioid painkillers to their patients to treat symptoms that in many cases didn't necessitate a medication as powerful as an opioid in the first place. Needless to say, people ended up getting hooked on these really powerful, really addictive pain pills. For many people, when their prescription ran out, they were hooked and they were jonesing for more. To satisfy their newfound opiate addiction, people would seek out heroin, and that necessarily involved the black market. So people weren't just dying from overdosing on opioid pain pills that they might not have actually needed, they were getting addicted to their opiates and then searching for heroin when their prescription ran out. And surprise, surprise, overdose deaths from heroin skyrocketed. Especially as black market suppliers cut their heroin supply with the extremely potent drug fentanyl, which is so strong that a safe dose can be measured in single grains. Taking 1 or 2 more grains of fentanyl than the safe dose, which are literally the size of sand particles, can be enough to induce a fatal overdose. Just a couple sand grains of this fentanyl can kill you. When this opioid epidemic problem began to affect millions of people, and millions of people began to search the black market for their heroin, and often they found opiates that were cut with fentanyl, this led to hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths, and the opioid epidemic came into full swing. Fortunately, there's evidence that medicinal marijuana can help patients with chronic pain reduce their dependence on opioid painkillers. I already mentioned marijuana, or cannabis, earlier in this episode. Hemp is a type of cannabis, which I think really underscores how amazing this family of plants really is. Not only can it be used to make high-quality textiles and fabrics and ropes and even building materials, cannabis can also be used medicinally for pain relief, appetite stimulation, and nausea suppression. And it can be used recreationally, just by people who enjoy the experience of cannabis intoxication. Plants are often used recreationally, from activities as diverse as gardening and cultivating potted plants, to using plant products as cosmetics, to consuming plants that induce altered states of consciousness. For home gardens and decorative potted plants, small flowering plants are the most common because they don't take up much room, they're not expensive to maintain, and they look and they smell good. They brighten up a room and they give it a kind of natural aesthetic. Flowers are also really nice to give to people you care about. It's a nice gesture. I like to give my wife flowers as a small little romantic gesture. And I'm sure that you like to give flowers to your significant other, or your mom on Mother's Day, or your grandparents on their birthday, or, whatever. Flowers are a wonderful gift, and the floral industry capitalizes on this desire to give flowers as gifts. The floral industry is absolutely massive. But anyway, about flowers brightening up a room, there are actually pretty interesting studies that show that being in a room with plants can make people more relaxed and less anxious. So they have a kind of aesthetic, atmospheric, ambient quality about them. They help spruce up rooms and spruce up our living spaces. Cosmetics are another recreational use for plants. Cosmetics use plant products for fragrances, for use in perfumes and colognes. Aloe and other moisturizers are used in shampoos and skin cleansers. Various flower and plant pigments are used for their color in makeup. And stuff like linseed oil, eucalyptus oil, and oil of turpentine are all used in mascara. Some plants have chemicals that when burned and the vapors inhaled, or when the plant product is consumed, it'll provide some kind of intoxicating effect that the person finds enjoyable and fun, or soothing and relaxing. There's a wide range of drugs that fall into this category, with a huge range of diverse effects and side effects, like coffee, cat, kratom, cocaine, and cannabis. Coffee beans are used to make coffee, which is a stimulating, awakening beverage that makes people more alert and focused. Cat is a flowering plant whose leaves are chewed in Africa and the Middle East, where the alkaloid cathinone induces an amphetamine-like high, which suppresses appetite and causes the person to be excited and restless. Now, on the other hand, you have Kratom, which is a plant that's used for relaxation and stress relief. Then you have cocaine, as extracted from the coca plant, which is consumed for its intoxicating effects, which can make the user feel stimulated and excited, confident and motivated. Although cocaine does have a high potential for abuse, and frequent snorting of cocaine can actually degrade the membrane tissue in the nose between the nostrils. This can even create a hole in that membrane, a hole inside of your nose connecting your nostrils together. It can make you suffer from nosebleeds a lot because that tissue is so heavily damaged. Then there's cannabis flowers from the cannabis plant that produce a psychoactive chemical called tetrahydrocannabinol, which can induce an intoxication characterized by slowed reaction speeds, altered thought patterns, novel perceptions of routine things or ideas, an altered perception of time. For example, time might seem to go by slower. You might have an increased heart rate, and what's colloquially called the munchies. Perhaps the most human use of plants is their involvement in religious myth and ceremony. All manner of plants are given religious connotation, from benign things you might eat almost every day to obscure plants only eaten for the most sacred of rituals. For example, garlic is a very common plant. It's used in food and for a time for some folk medicine purposes, and it's also been incorporated into religious belief. In ancient Europe, garlic typically had positive connotations, as it was believed to be a ward against demons and vampires and other unholy creatures. In the schools of Hindu and Buddhist belief, garlic is perceived as an aphrodisiac, or a stimulant of desire. The Jainists find this quality to be spiritually distracting, as do the Buddhists, who considers garlic and garlic-seasoned food to be stimulating of aggression. In the Islamic hadiths, it's discouraged to eat garlic before you come to the mosque, because your subsequent bad breath and body odor are unpleasant for the people who are sitting around you, and so it's kind of a rule built around common courtesy. Cannabis is also used for spiritual purposes, as practitioners use the altered mind state of cannabis intoxication as an aid to meditation and introspection. Olive branches are seen as symbols of peace and divine protection. In Christian mythology, the three magi, or the wise men who come bearing gifts for Christ, brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, gold isn't a plant, but frankincense and myrrh are. They're both a kind of gum, or a resin. Frankincense is extracted from the boswellia trees, and it's used as a kind of incense or a perfume for spiritual ceremonies, and it's also used as a skincare treatment. Myrrh is extracted from the thorny Commiphora trees. Now, it's also used as an incense, and it can also be consumed to treat coughing, joint pain, colds, and indigestion, among several other common ailments. More exotic plant compounds used in religious ceremonies include Salvia divinorum, Peyote, and Ayahuasca. Salvia divinorum is a powerful psychoactive plant that can cause hallucinations and entheogenic experiences. In South America, there are Mazatec shamans who use salvia in healing sessions to induce visions. Peyote is commonly used in the religious ceremonies of the indigenous people of Mexico and North America. Peyote is a flowering desert cactus called a divine messenger because when it's consumed, it induces a transcendent state of mind, deep insight, and entheogenic experiences. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic brew created by shaman in the Amazon rainforest, who combine dimethyltryptamine-containing plants like Psychotria viridis or Diplopteris cabrerana with the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. Now, the vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or an MAOI, which makes the dimethyltryptamine present in the viridis or the cabrerana plants. It makes the DMT active in the digestive system. If you were to just eat the plants with DMT, the DMT wouldn't be activated in your stomach. So you need to combine it with that vine, with the MAOI, so that it's bioavailable and you can absorb it and experience the psychedelic entheogenic effects. The ayahuasca intoxication creates one of the most powerful psychedelic and entheogenic experiences known to man, shattering the ego and transforming the consciousness into a catalyst for introspective growth. All of these plant chemicals are entheogens, which are substances that generate the perception of experiencing God or the divine. For most people, these experiences can help them find the personal strength and motivation to overcome psychological problems, addictions, and destructive behavior. Many people describe their experiences with these entheogens as the most spiritually significant moments in their lives. I think these compounds and these experiences are really important, far more important than most people might realize, because the measurable transformation in spiritual and emotional outlook can really change people's lives for the better. That's why these plant substances have been used for literally thousands of years as medicines for the soul. This is also where concepts like Gaia, the Earth Mother, come from, as one of the common features of an ayahuasca trip, as described by people who've taken it, is a profound sense of connection with the living world, and a consistent perception of a maternal incarnation of the planet's life force. I think it's endlessly fascinating that these entheogens blur the line between esoteric religious mysticism and measurable biochemistry. On a more aesthetic note, they've helped humans understand their place in this world, and to illuminate this sacred relationship between humans and plants. That's about it for this series on the Kingdom Plantea. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something that you thought was really cool, because I think plants are just absolutely amazing. The kingdom of plants is this almost infinite world of biochemistry to explore. It's just amazingly fascinating and amazingly beautiful, and I hope that I was able to impart some of that wonder onto you. And as always, thanks for listening.
Would you like to support the BioLogic podcast? It's super easy. When you open a new episode, press the like button or share it with your friends. If you aren't subscribed, you should hit the subscribe button so you can enjoy a new episode every week. You can also peruse our official store, which has a ton of cool stuff like hand-designed t-shirts, hoodies, and stickers. All the links you need are in the description section below.